So I did get a little wet. I have this vision of bringing one of those pump things in here one time, not just getting them, but getting a few other people too. So where have you seen God at work in your life this week, in the world around you? Where have you seen God at work recently? Thank you. Not only did Maxine survive the snow, but she came in here Friday morning in the cold and folded your bulletins for you and stuffed them along with Marge. So that was God at work in them too. Kay was referring to taking the Christmas Eucharist, I think it was day 10 of the 10th day of Christmas, to Carmel Health and Living. And sort of a community gathered around. Some of them were members of our congregation. Some of them were residents of the nursing home there, the rehab center there. And we celebrated the Christmas Eucharist. And I saw God at work in the joy and the community of that event. And also in Kathy Bloom, who was lugging the keyboard around. She went to 2 or 3 buildings before she found the right one to keep us on key as we sang Christmas carols and celebrated the Eucharist together. So yeah, I agree. I saw God at work in that. So thank you. Today is the festival, the feast day of the baptism of our Lord. The day we remember that Jesus got baptized. I think that feast day is a good way for us to start a new year. It's a good way, in my mind anyway, it's a good reason and a good way to start the new year for 2 reasons. Number one, we remember that in his baptism, Jesus is completely and fully embracing us and coming to us in every way he needs to and can to rescue and redeem us. And secondly, remembering his baptism gives us opportunity to remember our own. And remember that we too have been joined to him in the waters of holy baptism, so that his victory over sin and death is our victory over sin and death. I think that's always a good way to start a day, and it's a good way in a sense to kind of start a year. You know, some of us do those kind of New Year resolution things, and that's a way of saying I'm not really happy with the way things are. I'm not happy with my weight, I'm not happy with my exercise regimen, I'm not happy with this. And I've had a number of my own resolutions over I'm going to do this and, it lasts 3 days, or I'm going to do this and it lasts a week. And we all have some sort of resolutions from time to time that we institute in our lives as a way of saying, I'm not happy with the way things are. I want to bring to my life some sense of order and direction and purpose that I sense is missing. We're all that way about our lives, wanting to bring some order to the chaos that we find in our lives, because no matter how well we order them, there are always interruptions. There's always chaos. It's out there and it creeps into our lives. This is the beginning, the story of the beginning of creation, is that the earth was a formless void. There was nothing there. There was water, and you can kind of have an image of just water splashing up like waves going all over the place, and there was chaos. And over this chaos, God brings order. God creates the heavens and the earth. God creates plants and animals. God creates human beings, night and day, water above the firmament, water under the firmament, dry land. God creates this world of beauty and order. And we're, first of all, as human beings, kind of happy. If you remember the story of Adam and Eve, you kind of think, well, they're doing all right in this garden. But then they begin to think, we could order it better. We could do it differently, and we would like it a little bit differently than the way God has ordered it and created it. And so as we in our individual lives try to order and structure who we are and what it is we do, sometimes we think we know better than God about what our life should look like. Sometimes we think we know better than what God knows about what we should be up to and what we should be doing. It's clear that the people of God have been called to follow Jesus. It's clear that the people of God have been called to give themselves away in lives of service and ministry to the world. It is clear that we as people of God have been called to be witnesses, to proclaim the good news of Jesus in word and deed in our daily lives. And how many times do we find a way, I'm including myself in this, so, I'm not just looking at you. I'm looking at my own mirror here. How do we find a way to avoid it, to dodge it, to not have to do it, to let George do it or somebody else do it? We always find a way, or not always, but we sometimes find a way to not do what we are called to do, to order our lives differently than what God would call us to order them. Now, we all do it for a good reason. We do it to bring some order, to get out of the chaos, to bring light to the darkness. But we forget that we're not the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world. We forget that it's God who is the creator of all things, not we ourselves. We forget that it is God who can pierce the darkness, bring order to the chaos, and rescue his fallen world. I have a good friend who has a t-shirt, and he posted this t-shirt on Facebook. And it shows a picture of Jesus sitting down with a bunch of superheroes. So there's, Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and Thor and a bunch of these superheroes. And the caption at the bottom underneath the picture is Jesus saying, "And that's how I saved the world." That's not the image we have of how we can save our lives. It's not the image of how we think we can order our lives so that they're fruitful and beneficial. That somehow cross-bearing is the way to do it. That being a witness to the cross of Jesus Christ is the way to order and structure our lives. Somehow that's more like a sign of weakness. After all, Jesus died on that cross. Jesus gave up his life on that cross. But he did it to rescue us. He did it to save us from the very power of death, from the very darkness of the grave, and in his resurrection opened the kingdom of heaven to all believers. In his baptism, Jesus is saying, "I am here to do battle." In his baptism, Jesus is here to say, "I am here to fight the forces of darkness and chaos in the world and in your lives." In the first century, water wasn't a pleasant place to be. People didn't go to the beaches back then to lay in the sun and catch some rays. That just didn't happen back then. Number one, they didn't have the time. And number two, that just wasn't part of their life. The water was a threat. Water was something of which they were afraid. Think of the fishermen, James and John and all those folks that Jesus called to be his disciples. They even owned their own boats. They were out on the lake fishing all the time. And when a storm arose, they were so terrified that they woke Jesus up and screamed at him, "Oh, don't you care that we're going to die?" People were afraid of the water. When Jesus entered the water in his baptism, he was saying, "I have come to do battle with all the forces of darkness and chaos in the world. I have come to do battle with all the demons that live in the dark places of this world and in the dark places of your mind and your heart and your life. I have come to destroy the power of sin and death in your life and in this world." And he did it. He did it through his own death and his own resurrection. In the waters of holy baptism, we are joined to that death and resurrection. That death and resurrection of Jesus becomes ours. That mission to which Jesus is sent by God, it becomes our mission. That is, to carry his light into the darkness of the world. That is, to do battle with the demons, because there are demons out there in the world for us to do battle with. There is the power of sin and darkness that continues to corrupt and continues to afflict ourselves and our world. And so we, in the waters of holy baptism, are given both the promise that we have been joined to him, but also the promise that as he was raised from death to life again, we too have the promise of life and resurrection. We too have the promise of a life that cannot be destroyed by any darkness, any chaos, any demon in our world. It is a good way to start a new year, remembering that we have been baptized into Jesus Christ. One of the things in my years of ministry that I was always jealous about were people in the congregations who had been members of a congregation for decades. I never did that. The longest I was ever a member was in my hometown in Oak Ridge for maybe 14, 15 years, and the last 5 or 6 of those I was gone college and seminary. So I really never had this lengthy time in a congregation. I never put down roots so that all these people had those roots when I went to congregations. They had families around. They had grandmas and grandpas and uncles and aunts and sisters and brothers and all kinds of folks, and they'd been there for a while. And some of you know what I'm talking about because I know a lot of you have been here forever, or decades anyway. I had in a sense, no really deep geographical roots. But what I always found was that my roots were in the waters of holy baptism. There I found my identity. There I found my purpose. There I found the love of God. And there I found family. You all do the same. You find family amongst each other, even if you've got blood family around. You also find pilgrim people who are your family, who come to you in your time of need, who become light for you in your moments of darkness, who visit you and uphold you and lift you when you fall in a parking lot. You all have that family as well. And that has always been my family, has been that community of the faith. Yeah, I've got kids and a wife, and we have a family, but we've never had those deep roots in any one location like many people do. My deep roots have been the waters of holy baptism, where I was joined to Jesus, where I was proclaimed a beloved Son of God. And hearing those words again today, wow, my goodness, that is a great way to start a new year. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.